Heavy Light Podcast brought to you by Fraternity of Giants. Go to fogapparel.com. Use code HEAVYLIGHT, all one word. That's going to save you 10% on the best apparel and accessories in the world of strength sports. Go get it. fogapparel.com. Heavy Light! All right. Throws coach at Sacramento State, as I just recently learned, and Pro Highland Games athlete Kyle Lillie. How you doing, Kyle?
Fantastic, man. It's great to be on here. I've been listening to the podcast for since you started doing it. So, it's fun to finally be a part of it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always I know, obviously I'm looking at the numbers. I know people are listening. It's just always like a shock when somebody says, "Hey, I listened to it." It's forever like a content creator doubt. It's like nobody's listening. I know it. It's all fake.
No, yeah. I mean, anything with the Highland Games, I'm all over it. So.
That's awesome.
The second you said you started a podcast, I was right on it. So
sweet, man. Yeah, no, you definitely have been. You definitely been all over it. Now you came on to the Highland Games scene. What it was like 3 years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago at this point.
Yeah, I started amateur 2016.
Okay.
Yeah. It was very abbreviated season. I started in like August. I had 2 games, I think. But from then on, I was hooked. And right after that, I made the whole 2017 year was just completely about Highland Games. So
nice. Yeah. I mean, you seem to come in pretty quick. Like I'd imagine, I don't know your story and we'll get to it, but I imagine like a lot of track and field guys, it was something that was always kind of in your periphery. Like you knew this existed, this way to throw outside of school and you got a chance to try it.
Yeah. I knew it existed, but I didn't really have much interest in it at first. Just cause I was in college, I was, throwing the shot put and the Olympic hammer. And when I graduated, I had this, giant goal of making Olympic trials in the hammer. So that's really all I focused on the year after that. And then I met a pro. I was actually living in Maine. I was coaching at a small Division III school in Maine. And I met Will Barron, who's a former pro.
Yeah. Will and Dave, man, the Barron brothers.
Yeah. I don't know if Will's still throwing, but he saw me throw the hammer. And he's like, "Hey man, you ever try the Highland Games?" And I kind of pushed it off to the side, like, dude, I'm trying to make trials. Like,
right.
I don't need to throw rocks in a field in a state. So, right. Well, my dream of making trials got crushed pretty quick after that. So, I called up Will again and I was like, "Hey, I'll give it a shot." So I went over to his house and practiced in his backyard. And it was a lot of fun, really weird. Learning some of the new events, learning how different the wire hammer is from the Olympic hammer. He had a caber in his backyard, which was cool, but I broke it. So
of course,
I apologize about that. Then showed me the hammer, and then I broke his hammer, so that was awesome as well. And then he showed me sheath by putting a bunch of stuff in a duffel bag and then sticking a pitchfork through the duffel bag. So
that's fantastic. I love that he didn't have an actual sheath. But
yeah.
So there's something of like a legacy here. I think when you start getting people into the games, like it's happened over and over again. It's happened to me. So Hayden Ballio, he's on the cusp of going pro, and he lives in the same area as me. He's been on the podcast a lot of times. And when he wanted to first learn how to throw caber, he came over to my field and used my caber and broke it. And it's like the same story over and over and over again. Everybody, it's like the penance you pay for getting a new person into the sport is if they're going to break your caber. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I broke it towards the bottom. He cut that off and then shaved down so we could still use it. It was just a little smaller. And then I broke that one. So
that'll boy. Yeah, there you go. Well, now you just end up with a picking tool. So, it's funny. That same one that Hayden broke at my field, I cut it down to, I think it's like 5 feet long, but it was like an old barn pole. And I just use it for picking work. So when I'm teaching somebody new or like, a kid in the neighborhood, or if I just want to work on it, like actually in like the YouTube videos where I did like the caber instruction stuff on how to ditch and everything, it's actually just that like 5 foot caber. Like I just did a tight shot. So it looked like a caber, but like, it's really great. Because you can just pick it, drop it without all the consequence. So I actually kept it around. It's actually a pretty fantastic training tool because nobody wants to like try to turn the caber 10 times. Where does everybody mess up when they're new?
The pick. Yeah. I still mess up on the pick. So.
Oh, hell yeah, man. You've been picking cabers for 3 years now, 4 years. Yeah. So, and that's still in the great scheme of things, not the longest time. It's still, you'll still find some weird sticks.
I mean, that's what happened. my last competition in Texas was, well, one, it was raining, so it was wet, but
oh god,
I had a pick on a wet caber and it went south, and then the caber ended up breaking, so we didn't finish the caber competition. So I didn't get another attempt.
So I don't know if you listened to the last episode with who
Yeah.
was it? With Garrett on here. But he was talking about the same sort of thing happened. And then and I talked to Hayden, and he was talking about, he said basically you busting that caber screwed his entire caber, because that
it wasn't me that busted the caber.
Okay,
it wasn't me.
All right, okay. I thought it was was it Spencer that broke it?
I think Spencer broke the challenge caber. Kevin Becker broke the competition caber.
Oh, that's right. He did say it was Becker.
Yeah.
Becker wiped all his scores because they had to wipe the round. So then he ended up tying for fourth.
Yeah, that's him and I tied for fourth, because him and I both had bad picks on the first attempt, and then that's where I lost a bunch of points in the overall there.
Yeah, then that's the classic story too, man. And it's funny that you're still, you're obviously a pro and one of the top pros now, and it's just you're still, but a lot of that comes from your throwing background, obviously, because there's similarity. But like the weird events like the sheaf and the caber, that's always the one when you come from track and field. It takes more time to feel like you're consistent with those. Have you noticed that as well?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when I first got into it, I my very first games, actually, I pulled 30 feet with a 16-pound bag.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then every game after that, I couldn't touch 25 even with a 16-pound bag, so that was fun. But caber is still something that I'm figuring out to this day. I mean, there's some days where I'm just on and I can turn any caber I get in my hand, and then there's some days I can't get a pick and it's falling back behind me, and that's that's still the challenge to today. Now I think I figured out sheaf pretty well. My sheaf's kind of taking that next step, but caber is the one where I still, and I don't have anything to practice with at the moment. I had a practice caber for a little bit and I broke that. So I think I had it for like 2 months, a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah. I've taken 20 times more reps in games with cabers than I have ever practiced.
Yeah.
They break and it's hard to get out and practice and do, and it sucks. Nobody really likes practicing caber that much, but
it's hard to practice by yourself.
Oh yeah. And nobody to stand it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. Yeah, it does. But yeah, like I don't know, like you get reps in games for those sort of things, and it's hard to emulate anywhere else. Yeah. So when I've got a couple of things that tie into your transition, but one thing that really stands out to me is that you focused on the hammer in college. You said you were trying to go to the trials, and now first question is, did you choose hammer over shot put just because it's so impossible to get to the trials for shot put in the U.S. right now, or did you really love the hammer?
No, I love the Olympic hammer. It's still my favorite event to this day. It's my favorite event to coach. It's still the event that I have the most success coaching in. So I think it's it's definitely the event that I understand the most.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got to Arizona State, I was a shot putter, and I was still a shot putter all the way through. My senior year is when I really started to figure it out. And that's where I fell in love with it. And then, I was far away in both aspects, but then kind of what you were saying was like, if I can bump up this little bit, I might be able to make trials in the hammer. But if I bump up this little bit, I'm still not even being close in the shot. So
yeah,
it was kind of a little mix of both. But
the U.S. shot put is ridiculous, dude.
It's crazy, and it's just getting crazier and crazier, even at the collegiate level. I remember, when I was in college, I want to say like 1870, 1880 made it to the national championship my senior year. Yeah. And 2019, it was like 1940 or something like that.
It's ridiculous.
So far.
Like throwing that standard 10 years ago would have been like, oh, you're an Olympic gold medalist, clearly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like another example is like at the Pac-12 level where I was, when I got to ASU, I threw 57 feet and I got like 7th in the conference. My senior year, I threw 61 feet and I got 5th. So it just kept, growing and growing and growing.
You got better, but everybody else did too.
Yeah, exactly. And then, freshmen would come in and throw 68 feet. And I'm just like, what's going on?
I think they're just making the shots lighter, man. I think it's like it's like Major League Baseball. They're just juicing the ball now.
Yeah, for sure.
So the second part of my question about the hammer, though, is one thing that I've gone on record as saying a lot of times, and I stand by it, is that of all the track and field disciplines, of all the throwing disciplines, I feel like hammer throwers transition to the Highland Games better than other athletes. Not, there's exceptions, obviously, but I think in general, if you said like, hey, what throwing discipline can you do that's going to transfer to the Highland Games that's going to be hammer? Now, I'm asking you this question because you're a throws coach and you really do think about this kind of nerdy shit like I do. Like, why do you think that is?
Body awareness. I mean, the body awareness to get through, like at the elite level, a 3 or a 4 turn hammer, that translates right to weights, right to stones, right to hammers. The explosive strength you still need for the hammer, jumps right into weight over bar. Like you said, caber and sheath for the weird ones, but some of those, body awareness, coordination, strength aspects kind of make that transition, the time a little shorter. It doesn't take as long to learn that. And I definitely think that's, the reason that I was able to jump in so quickly was just, my, I'm definitely not going to say elite, but my higher level, hammer experience definitely, helped transition into these crazy heavy events.
Yeah. And I think the hammer is heavy enough and far enough away from you to where it changes the dynamic. Like shot's great. Like it's heavy, but it's also like the amount of separation isn't the same. And like, there's a terminology I use in my athletes where when I'm drawing things up for them, I talk about the system, and the system is you plus the weight and where that shifts your center of gravity.
Yeah.
And like with Olympic hammer, it's wild. Like it really shifts your center of gravity out. So there's a lot of compensation, a lot of things you have to do. And I think some of that helps when you start having to throw 28, 56 pounds. You have to, and that system has moved the center of gravity further out away from you, as opposed to like disc is extremely fast and explosive, but it's pretty light.
Yeah.
There's just not an analog. And like, that's, I think the thing that causes a lot of transition time for track athletes to Highland Games is just the shit's heavy.
Yeah.
And the system shifts out further than they're used to.
Yeah. And like orbit and at like your body axis, like where you're rotating around, that's all key things in the hammer, and that's all things that I still focus on to this day when I'm throwing like the lightweights and like the weights, for example. So just being already understanding of that and being able to apply that to, even though it is such a different event, being able to apply that kind of takes the time of learning the event off a ton.
Yeah, no, throwing is throwing, right? At the end of the day, it's like you can change the implement, you can change the delivery method, but there's only so many ways that a body can propel something. Like I come from like a baseball history. Like, I grew up playing baseball, played through high school and stuff. And I think a big eye opener for me was realizing finally that like, it's not that different. Like, I was a pitcher. So, yes, there are differences in my delivery method and what I have to do, overhand versus push or sling and all that kind of stuff. But the mechanics and the stages of throwing, they might have different names across different sports, but it's the same thing. Like it really is. Like I still have to wind up, I still have to load, I still have to cock, I still have to accelerate, decelerate. I have to, there have to be all those things that just might look a little bit different because of the weight. But yeah, I mean, throwing is throwing at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I fell in love with it so much. It was another way to get my throwing outlet in, even though it wasn't the same sport that I fell in love with at first. It was another way to get that throwing outlet in and continue to meet new people and be in this fun atmosphere. And that's really what drew me to the games.
Well, and a common thing that I hear from track athletes that move to Highland Games is that it strips away a lot of the bullshit and just you get the throw. Do you feel like that's the case?
100%. I mean, the biggest downfall to me in track and field is, and I think this is changing a lot. Talking to a lot of people, especially on like the pro level, it used to just be, everybody, hated everybody. You needed to, be in your own head, not talk to anybody. Everything's all about the number. Whereas, Highland Games, there is a little bit of that, but most of it's like, I want to see my friend succeed and I want to succeed, and we all want to have fun. We all want to throw far. And that's definitely changing, especially I think in the US, all the high level throwers in the US are, they're friends or at least, comrades, to a point that they can go into a track meet and have fun. Whereas that was something that if I didn't do well, I didn't have fun regardless when I was in track. And like now, even if I don't do well, I'm still having fun. That's to me, that's the biggest difference between like track and field and Highland Games.
Yeah. I mean, the way I like to think of Highland Games is that, and I think this is why it appeals to so many people, especially like, washed up athletes like us, is that it's a team sport played individually.
Yeah.
Like, it has that vibe and the camaraderie of a team sport that a lot of us grew up playing, but I don't need a team of 11 people to help me practice it. I don't need an organized practice. I can practice and compete by myself. You get that same kind of thing. And if you can have the intensity while you're in the box throwing and then just relax after, I think that's the key. I will say, and now I've never thrown with you personally, so I don't know if you're like out there, but I know a lot of guys that do come from that track mindset like you're talking about. They really do have trouble with that. They have trouble not mean mugging, not being grumpy, not be feeling bad if they're doing bad. And then like kind of, it takes a little while to transition. Have you always felt like as soon as you got to throwing your first Highland Games, you're like, oh, this is a relief? Or do you feel like there's an adjustment period where you still kind of have the track and field mindset?
The first games was definitely a relief. It was very relaxed. I was kind of chill. I had no idea what I was doing. The second I thought I could be good at this is when that mindset started to flip back into track and field mode. And it took me probably a good year to really figure that out, that it's not track and field and you can't treat it the same. And, if you have a bad event, you kind of just got to brush it off and, not get all pissy about it. So
yeah, it's 9 events, man. Like that's such a big transition. I think that's one that a lot of people coming into the sport sleep on a lot of time. Yeah. Now, what was the biggest thing like that you noticed that you had to change in the way that you trained or the way you looked at the thing or how you got your mindset versus when I'm going to do 1 or 2 events today versus I got to do 9 events all day? How did you transition that? How did you make that work?
Well, I mean, mindset wise, it really, the eye opener to me, and it was really early on, the eye opener to me is I went to the Loon Highland Games in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Great games.
And it was my second games ever. But I did so well at the main Highland Games. One of the amateur guys got me an amateur invite there. But just watching the way that all the pros were there, and learning that there was really pros, but watching the way that the pros kind of handled the day really kind of showed me the difference of the sport. Being able to watch, Matt Vincent, Spencer Tyler, Dan McKim was there, Matt Doherty was there. There was just a slew of great throwers there. When I started to compete and when I started to realize that, if I had a bad event that would kind of ruin the other events, I really had to kind of sit down with myself and, almost talk myself off a cliff. Yeah. And not on a daily basis, but like really just try and think of the day as a whole instead of the day individually. When I was in college, there'd be some meets that I would travel to and I'd get 3 attempts in one event and that was it. Yeah. So that was, having to sit down and have that conversation of just like, not every event's going to be great. Not every event's going to, be a PR. Most events aren't going to be a PR. Yeah. Having that conversation with myself really helped propel my throws going into like 2018 for sure.
Yeah. So, and then in that same vein, 2-part question. So right now, what do you think your favorite event is? Just top of the head. What do you think it is?
Right now, probably it's a tie between the sheaf and the lightweight.
Yeah. So let's say you're in love with lightweight. You've been throwing lightweight. Well, it feels good. And a lot of times when you're new into it, you get out there and if lightweight goes bad, it becomes a shit show. Like it becomes a spiral after that because like I was feeling so good. I knew I had a PR coming in that. Like I remember a particular games in Arlington, Texas, where I've been just bombing hammers, like just throwing absolute bombs in practice. It's like, I can't wait for hammers. And then of course I didn't do shit in hammers because, the conditions were different. We're throwing off concrete or whatever. Like, and then it was a downward spiral after that. So you can really get caught in that. I think like if one event goes bad, but I think it's awesome that you, instead of just seeing like, oh, that's so cool, there are pros here, that you actually had an eye to seeing like, hey, how are they managing this? Like, how are they handling that? Did you have a chance to kind of talk with any of those guys, or like in the years since had a chance to sit down and like actually talk about that stuff?
No, not. I mean, I've talked to them. I've competed with a few of them. I never got to compete with Matt. He retired like right after that. But I've
he saw you. He saw you coming.
I doubt it was that. I highly doubt it was that. But I haven't had a chance to talk to him about that specifically. Just because when we do hang out, it's usually after games, and the last thing we talk about is games.
Throwing.
Yeah. So I haven't really had a chance to really sit down and talk to him about that. But it'd be something that would be really cool to sit down and talk, especially someone like, Spencer, where I see Spencer 10 times a year at this point.
Right.
Sit down. He was one of the ones that I did look at, when I came up in that second game. So Dan Tennyson was another one, actually. I competed against him. It was his last year amateur.
Yeah.
And he was another one that I could even him, I could see, something didn't go right. And it was just like, on to the next,
Right.
Whereas like when I rolled into the games, it was like, I was primarily like, I knew the hammers were different enough that like my hammer wasn't going to translate right away. But I knew I could still throw the shot. So I was like, stone's my event, I guess you could have said, like my very first year. And if stones didn't go well, which sucks because it's the first event.
Yeah.
If stones didn't go well, that set the tone for the whole day. So I'd love to get down and chat with him about that for sure. Maybe I'll do that when I see Spencer in Texas in July.
Yeah, but it's hard to, and I get what you're saying. Like, it makes for a good podcast question, but in reality, I like my second year throwing. It was in Texas, actually, at Arlington, because they had a pro class there, and I think it was Matt, it was Andy. I don't know if Spencer was pro by that point, but it was a few other people, Chad Gustin, and I remember being on the field and like, Matt and Andy and I we were friends already. And like, so it wasn't that we, obviously I was throwing with the AMs and everything. And, but I spent time on the field with them and hanging out with them in between throwing and stuff. And the thing that really struck me was if you hang out in the field, like let's say everybody's got a shag for themselves and you're all out in the field, amateurs, especially non-track and field amateurs, are talking about throwing constantly. And they're talking about their throwing, their lifting, everything constantly. If you go over to the pros, they're talking about anything but throwing when they're out there, because they've already done all that process work in their heads. And I think some of the surprise has gone out of it. And I think that's you keyed in on something pretty important there in terms of mindset. It's that I think if you have one event, think about nothing but that event the whole time. If you got 9 events and it's going to take 8 hours to do everything, it's like, dude, you better chill out, because you've only got so much energy in the tank to actually get through all that. And, if you get fired up and upset and worried about throwing and technique in every single event, you're just going to be exhausted and no fun to be around at all.
Yeah. And even now, I still, every once in a while, I'll still catch myself. If it's really, really bad, I'll still catch myself, but I'll take 2 minutes, walk away, maybe go grab a beer, and then
there you go.
And then I'm good. So
I used to take a lap when I would have I would take a lap around the field, just kind of stroll, just walk, and just get away from everybody, get away from human beings that are trying, because you know how it is. Like, even you do something shitty and everybody's trying to encourage you and be nice. Like, you're like, fuck off. Like inside, you're like, leave me alone.
Well, most of the time at the pro level, the encouragement stops after the first shitty attempt.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. After that's like, hey, you're on your own now, buddy.
Yeah. And then it just becomes a bunch of shit talking in a fun way, but there's still.
But that's better, honestly. That makes it way better. I'd rather laugh. I've always thrown, especially height events, I throw my best if I'm laughing right before I start swinging the implement. It just always works better that way.
Yeah, it kind of loosens you up. You're not in your own head the whole time thinking about what do I got to do? The next temp's coming up. This person's throwing that. When you're joking around, messing around with your guys on the field, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, you're next. And oh, well, okay, now flip that switch and
there it goes. Yeah,
it's go time.
Yeah, and it is funny because one of the first things you mentioned is like we do spend a lot of time like coaching and encouraging each other in the Highland game. Like, if somebody is really like, if they ask a question, it's like, hey man, what's going on in that one? Somebody will tell you for sure. So that kind of makes me think about, because you're a throws coach, you do this for a living and everything. What is the most common thing like amateur to pros, but obviously amateurs have less throwing experience. But what is the most common thing that you see people getting in the Highland Games that are learning to throw? What's the most common mistake or big thing that they're doing wrong in terms of technique? I guess, mindset we've talked about, but like in terms of technique, like what's the biggest catch-all thing that you see is like, man, if amateurs would just think about this or do this, they'd be so much better.
I mean, obviously every event's different, but the thing I see the most, especially when it comes to like the stones and the weights, specifically, being, what's the right word for it? Being trusting leaving the ground, trusting getting both feet off the ground. Because I see a lot of amateurs, they almost walk through it, and kind of they don't trust themselves getting up off the ground with both feet and kind of planting. Especially like in the weight for distance, like on that first turn, it's very much just like a step and step for a lot of amateurs.
Yeah.
And that's something I see all the time. And I try and, it's hard to coach if you can say coach. It's hard to, coach people in that just because that's a comfortable thing. They don't have that experience, that body awareness to leave the ground with something heavy in your hand. So I don't know how to really describe how to fix it.
Well, I mean, if you tell, the problem is if you tell a brand new person, somebody in like the first year or two of throwing, you tell them like, hey, leave the ground and jump, they're going to do it at the wrong time and it is going to go bad. Because they, like you said, they don't have the feel. They don't know, like at this point when the weight or the stone is behind my hip here, now I can drive everything that way by getting my feet up and down again like that. Yeah, that takes a while. But, some of it is, I think, like you said, comfort level, but there's no medicine like repetition, right? There's no medicine like reps, learning to do that. But learning when to time that and learning when to be comfortable doing it. Well,
I'm just saying, leaving the ground in general is an uncomfortable feeling if you're not used to it.
That's true.
Adding weight to that, that's, people just don't, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. That why would you, like, you're trying to throw something, why would you leave the ground completely? And I'm not talking, obviously, I'm not talking jump 20 feet off the air, but like, just even for that split second of being able to kind of switch your feet instead of, that step and pull, being comfortable doing that is extremely hard, even without a weight.
Well, yeah. And I think when people watch people like you throw and they say, man, he's fast through the box, like he moves really fast. And you try to translate that with, like you said, plodding and walking and like working the ground too long and trying to step through. You can't get that kind of speed. The speed comes from you connecting, launching, and then you plus the weight, again, the system thing, moving with speed. Like you can move a lot faster if you've got a 28-pound implement moving with you instead of against you. And that speed through the box really comes from that. It's just like when you're throwing the wire hammer, right? Like you're not just accelerating yourself in a circle this fast. Like you're using the hammer to do that. And until you understand that, you're never going to get like the Kyle Lillie kind of speed, the Matt Vincent kind of speed through the box, because it's faster than you can actually do it with an empty hand at some time. At certain moments in the throw, it's faster than you can move without a weight in your hand. So 100%. I think that's good advice, man. I think that's good because I think a lot of people, they do get, I'm actually going to integrate that myself with athletes, is that I think a lot of people get very uncomfortable with the idea of leaving the ground, and they're coached by people who are well-meaning, but tell them like, you don't want to be in the air because if you're not in the air, you're not putting force on the implement or anything like that. But I dig it, man. I think it is good advice.
Yeah. There is, to your point, there is that point of, the longer you're in the air, the less force you can put on it. Right. If you're 1 foot in the ground, you can't apply force to it. But there's that half a second in the throw in both turns where you're off the ground, and that has to be comfortable. You have to really work that.
And there's speed, or like there's pace or whatever, and then there's position. And a lot of times getting off the ground is a way to get your position. It's not all about like developing speed or like trying to work the ground. Like, hey, in order to get to my finish and work the ground, I have to get there and switch my feet here. Like, you know, a lot of this stuff starts to feel natural when you've thrown long enough. It's like, yeah, you just get to the front, your feet are there. But it's easy to forget when you're like year one that it felt terrible doing that, getting your feet. But yeah, you have to, sometimes you got to get off the ground. In fact, you have to. If you tell me to switch my feet while I'm moving, I have to get them off the ground. Yeah. I can't not do it. I can't like hold on, I have to do a front roll.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen that way. Listen, I get it. You want to get better at the Highland Games. You're doing everything you can to get better at this sport. I've been there. I'm still there. What you need is a plan. You do need practice, but you also need a plan. And that's where heavy light programming comes in. Heavy Light Programming offers throws programming and lifting programming. Every week in your inbox, you get a plan. You get an outline of what you need to do. You get the exact movements. You get explanations of the movements that you need to be doing in practice. You get an understanding of why you're on the practice field instead of just being on the practice field trying to throw as hard as you can over and over again. It's a dead end. Doesn't get you anywhere. You need a plan. So go to MikeBeach.com. Click on coaching. That's going to give you access to heavy light throws programming or heavy light lifting program or the full athlete program, which has both. That is throws programming, lifting programming in your inbox every week, telling you the plan you need to take so you can say, yes, coach, and then go out and do the work, which as growing up as an athlete, that means so much to me. Having that just told what to do, that soldier mentality, get on the field and go. I love it. MikeBeach.com, click on coaching, heavy light programming. I'm gonna keep hammering you about the coaching stuff though, because it's really cool to have somebody who has a throws coaching background, is working as a throws coach, and is competing in the Highland Games. Now, you mentioned the difference between the wire hammer and the Scottish hammer. What did you do in your training to make that transition? I'm always fascinated by that because obviously your feet can't move. You got a stiff, rigid ball. One of them's way heavier than you're used to. So what did your training look like to make that transition? And more importantly, what did you learn to focus on? What was your thought process in building how to train for that?
So the wind with the wire hammer is, I mean, if you look at the pro level, you can argue against this, but the wind for the wire hammer is a lot more passive. It's a lot more, you know, set the ball where you want it to go. And then, you know, you put the ball where you want it on your first turn.
Yeah.
And you don't, I quickly realized I was trying to throw the Scottish hammer like I throw the wire hammer, very passive and, you know, kind of tight over the shoulder, and learning to, one, be a little more explosive with it, kind of a little quicker with the wind, but then the reach behind for me was the biggest one. Because, you know, as wire hammer, you don't want to lean back and extend those hips while you're winding.
Right, because you can turn 180 degrees and put it back there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like learning, I watched a lot of like Matt's old videos. I watched a lot of Ryan Vieira's old videos that are somewhere on YouTube still. But trusting, one, when I finally got boots, and trusting that like that hip extension and lean at the top and working that ball back down to your right foot was.
But like basically being able to connect it from behind your head down to your right foot, like being able to maintain a push and a connection through there.
Yeah. Being able to extend that hip, reach over the top and push it down was what really kind of helped it jump. And my hammers overall were definitely my weak spot, you know, especially when I got to the pros, because I didn't understand that. I was trying to, you know, be passive and, you know, long with it, but long, you know, out instead of up.
Yeah.
And I took the end of 2019, 2020 season to really start to make those changes. And just now it's really starting to pay off.
Now, you talked about the first wind too, and this has been with a couple of my athletes, this has been like a really hard focus point right now. And even for myself, actually, because I'm trying to kind of get myself back in throwing mode with the hammer. On that first wind, when you're first starting, like for you as a right-handed thrower, you're going from your right side up to your left and getting it up. what is your thought process? Because you said it's not passive, and I agree. It's maybe more passive than the ones after it, but it has to be a different, like kind of active putting it into place. So what's your thought process going into wind one to start things?
So I switched over to like a more dynamic start.
Yeah, that's very popular right now.
I felt in my dynamic start, I hold it at the top. Like I hold pretty much down where the hammer is.
Yeah, the wide grip, right? Yeah.
And then I throw it down to 0 and connect my hands. That first wind, I'm really thinking about reaching back up and getting back behind me. And it is very passive compared to the other throws, but I'm really focusing on setting that orbit that I want, and then being able to work it back down to 0, back down over that right foot. But that
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll just say that to me, the dynamic start really helped me feel that better, because I can literally come off of what I would consider like a wind kind of movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And throw it up into 180 into that catch position.
Well, and the secret is you're kind of starting the hammer behind your right hip already. Yeah. So it creates that feeling of like, okay, that's what I want on that side eventually. So let me get back to that. Now, I saw, on the video portion of this, so I'm seeing how when you say get it behind you, you're pointing right behind your head.
Yeah.
Are you really thinking that, or are you trying to get it over to your left wider? Like, are you thinking literally get it straight behind my head?
Well, I tend to, this is the wire hammer thrower in me coming out. I still tend to like kind of turn my shoulders to where I can line up what my 0 would still be right over my right foot. Yeah. So it is back, behind my left, but I tend to turn my shoulders more. And I think that's still just the wire hammer thrower in me coming out a little bit. But my high point is still over my left shoulder. My low point is still over my right foot.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and that does make sense. It's kind of like splitting hairs a little bit when we're throwing, because our body position changes so much. Like we all use this terminology of like 12 and 6, or like 0 and anything like that. But really, a lot of that is we're in motion here. It's not always going to maintain. Like you can try to draw lines the best you can, but I'm curious about that, because so much of my current trying to get the hammer back on track is thinking about getting longer and higher above me on my left and behind me on my left, like or behind me. It's like it's doing a lot of that stuff. So you find that you're able to set that on the wind, on the first wind.
Yep. Yeah, that dynamic wind really helps me set that first one, and I can feel where it is at the top. Whereas when I was, either starting with that that static wind where it's just on the ground, which is what I used to do. Starting with that static wind, I didn't feel where my orbit was until my second wind, and by then it's pretty much too late, and usually something's off by then. Whereas this more dynamic one that I've started doing, I can feel right where my orbit is right off that first turn, and then I can really start to crank it.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm actually, the only reason I did this podcast is actually so I can get you to give me that advice on hammers. I'm going to go out and practice after this. So this is actually just a private recording here. Shifting gears too, I was just thinking about it. You've been down to Texas a couple times now, and I remember you actually trained, you were in the weight room with Spencer, I think like last year, year before, something like that.
Yeah, it was December 2019. I was actually there for a track and field conference, and I snuck away for a day to work out with Spencer.
How did that go?
It went well.
He's a puny little guy, huh?
Yeah, he whooped my butt. I never trained deadlift going into his training session, and he was like, "We're doing deadlift," and I was okay. What are we doing? We're doing every minute on the minute with, it was like 495 or something like that. I was like, cool,
great.
I was sore for like 2 weeks after that, and then I started to train the deadlift.
Funny, that woke me right up to it.
Yep.
So when you coming from a collegiate background and then moving to Highland Games, has there been a shift in your weight room philosophy and how you're doing things, or have you just wanted to do something different? Like what does it look like now for you?
I mean, it's shifted all over the place since I graduated.
Yeah, that happens.
When I first graduated, I was, my training was basically verbatim what I did at ASU, and then when I really started to focus on Highland Games, I wanted something a little more different that would kind of apply more specifically to the games. So I started looking at, I looked at Matt's book, Throws Lab, I think it is. And I did his throws lab training for pretty much my entire time as an amateur. And then I started working with Ryan Whiting, who's a professional, former professional shot putter. He's shot put coach right now, and he started doing my weight room.
He's strong as hell too, man.
Yes, he is stupid strong. But he started programming my my weight room the end of the 2019 season, because I finished that season with kind of a sour taste in my mouth. And he started training me all the way through what would have been the 2020 season. And then when 2020, when everything got canceled, I don't like to train just to train. And
same way, man.
Yeah, when there wasn't anything that I could push towards, I kind of, I told Ryan, I was like, hey man, I'm gonna back off Highland Games for now. And I actually started training in strongman for a little bit. So I trained in strongman. I competed in a strongman show in last December of 2020, which was cool. I got really strong off that program. Probably the strongest I've ever been, but I also got really beat up, came away with like a broken foot and my back hurt.
Yeah. Strongman beats the shit out of you, man.
It's terrible.
Ooh.
I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved it. But coming off of that was tough. After that, I really focused on trying to be more athletic. So from basically December till now, I focused on trying to be a little more athletic. During the strongman training, I bulked up too. I got up to like 370 pounds.
Woo!
And I usually walk around at like 340. So that was a big jump for me.
Yeah.
And then now I'm back down to like 345. But I'm trying to drop to like the 330s and be a little more athletic, be a little more explosive, a little faster. And I really have to thank the strength conditioning coach at Sac State where I work. He's a great guy. He worked with the Broncos for a little while and really knows his stuff. And he's really helped me, one, with injury management, with broken foot and bad knees and bad back and bad shoulders, and just trying to be a little more athletic and explosive over the next year. Cause I listened to your podcast with Garrett and, him talking about, or you talking about, there's a baseline strength.
Yep.
And I feel like I had that coming off of that strongman training. Like I said, it's the strongest I've ever been. And, I knew, I've thrown really far without that strength. So I knew I didn't have to continue to work on absolute power and absolute strength. So I really focused on, being able to take the strength that I have and put speed behind it. And I feel like, if I can do that, then that's when things really start to jump. And in training, it's made sense. In training, things have really started to fly. I only have one sample, and that was a rainy games at Texas, but I'm excited for the future for sure.
But you can feel what's going on even in the bad conditions. Like you can tell when you've been training long enough.
Yeah.
Like you can tell, like, yeah, this is working. I feel wired up. I feel kind of ready to pop. Like this is what you're looking for. Now, when you say training for more athleticism, what does that look like in the gym? Like what movement wise does that look like? Because this is the stuff that I really kind of nerd out on.
A lot of some of the same movements. I mean, I still bench, I still deadlift. I went from a back squat to a front squat.
Yeah.
Deadlift, I actually switched from traditional deadlift to a sumo deadlift.
Huh. You don't look like a sumo deadlifter. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I hate it so much, but
I do like it for throwers though, man. I really do. I've
Yeah.
always liked it as a mix-in for throwers just because of the hip engagement. And
after a full 6 weeks on it, I felt great. I felt a little more explosive. The movement it's different. I still bench. I'm actually going to start switching to more of like a football bar bench where it's a little more of a neutral grip just because I have bad shoulders. Yeah. But the volume's a little higher, and the intensity is a little lower. So I'm not going for those big max numbers.
Right.
I'm trying to move weight quickly.
Yeah, there's no deadlift competition in the middle of the events.
Yeah, exactly. And I have zero interest in powerlifting. That sport just doesn't gravitate towards me. And after after training for strongman for 3 months and then doing a competition, I loved it, but it beat me up so bad that I don't know if I'd want to do it again. So
yeah, maybe not as a career. Maybe throwing would be a little bit more fun.
yeah, and continuing with Olympic lifts. Olympic lifts are huge.
Yeah, dude.
Absolutely huge. And even there, I've backed off. I haven't gone heavy in an Olympic lift in like a year. I still just try and just move weight quickly, whether that's, a clean and jerk, snatch, just snatch pulls, muscle snatch. I do a lot of plyos, upper body and lower body. Just trying to make sure everything can still move.
That is such a common theme, dude. That is the plyometrics, Olympic lifts, obviously, but that is, as I've said many times, is I'm really just like, all my training and my coaching is the product of being around people that are like way better at this and have been doing it for longer. And one thing that I picked up in the past 4 years or so was how common plyometric training was for throwers. Like, especially collegiate throwers. Like, you guys got forced to do that probably a lot.
Oh yeah.
And it carries over. And it was just funny because, growing up, so many of us do so many other sports. Like, you play football as a kid, basketball, baseball, whatever, hockey, if you're, in one of the coldest places. But, like, plyometrics is such a huge part of sports growing up. And then we just abandon that when we get to like strength sports and fringe sports like this, because it sucks. And, it's no fun. I'd rather play with the barbell. I'd rather play with my new toy. I'd rather load stones or something like that. But I've started adding that back so much, like, into my training. And I mean, like, every week in season, like, heavy light strength programming has like the second day of the week basically is either Olympic lifting or a plyometrics day, or a combination of the two. Mm-hmm. So it's bounding, jumping, throwing med balls, push-ups, pull-ups, like all that kind of stuff that everybody hates doing, especially when they weigh over 200 pounds. It's awful. But it's important stuff. I had to mention that it's just so uniform that people that actually come from a collegiate sports background or above talk so much about plyometrics and how important they are.
Yeah. And when I was programming for myself, as a throws coach, I program it into my athletes, but it's something I don't like to do. So I never program it.
It sucks.
So I kind of abandoned that. Same with a lot of single leg work.
Oh God. So that's, God, this is great, dude, because that is the number one thing all my athletes hate me for. That there's always single leg work. I do single arm work as well. Like, I do bilateral or unilateral stuff every week, but dude, the single leg work, as soon as nobody's telling you to do fucking lunges anymore, you're not doing them.
Absolutely gone. So when I started working with Coach Sparks at Sac State, he started putting that back in. I was just like, no, why?
Please.
But, it's something that, once someone's not telling you to do it, those things go by the wayside. Single leg, plyometrics, if it's not squat, bench, or deadlift, nobody cares.
Yeah, I can't set a PR. I can't set a PR in Bulgarian split squats. Yeah. Why would I do that?
So, that I think is definitely going to help with continuing injury prevention. Because like I said, I finished the 2019 season with a really sour taste in my mouth. I hurt my back really bad. And it made Pleasanton impossible. Like I limped through Pleasanton, and I should have been honestly fighting for a top 3 spot, and I ended up getting 7th. And then I had to pull out halfway through my next competition. I limped through the Celtic and got 3rd. And so that season really put a sour taste in my mouth, and I really have been focusing on trying to maintain injury since then, until I focused on strongman for 6 months. And then
you just focused on getting injuries, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Focused on there. Well, dude, that's another transition that I think is hard for dudes a lot of times. Like, you're a big fella and we throw heavy shit. Like, and you competed a lot, and it will wear you down. It wears you down different. It is like akin to strongman in a way, but it's the volume in which you do it I mean, it's on a full day. It's, if you don't take any extras, it's still at least 27 max effort throws with reasonably heavy stuff, and it will grind you to dust. People don't realize, man.
And that 2019 season, that you can multiply that times 10, because I had my normal stateside season and I went to Scotland for 2 weeks, did like 9 games in 14 days.
Yeah, and then that's a grind, dude.
Yeah, and then I went to Norway and did a pseudo strongman competition for no reason, and came back from that with a back injury that just ruined the rest of my season. So really focusing on trying to maintain just a level of fitness that can allow me to get through that and not, cripple myself has been especially my focus for this year for sure. Because I came off of that strongman training with a broken foot and my back hurt a lot. So trying to fix that was my goal for the last 3 months. And I feel pretty good right now. So
how'd you break the foot? I got to know.
Just trying to be, so I did the strongman. I got up to 370 and immediately I started thinking, okay, I got to start being athletic again because I got games coming up. So I started doing all my plyos and all that stuff at 370 and just, the stress of that, I got a stress fracture in my foot and had to take 5 weeks off to let that heal. But that 5 weeks off allowed me to drop back down to like my average 340-ish. So I can start being somewhat athletic again.
That sounds about right, man. That again, you put on like almost 10% of your body weight, like added on the top. So it's something's got to give at some point.
Yeah.
Now and just listening to you and kind of seeing your online presence, you've traveled quite a bit. Like you really make it around to a lot of games and you've really kind of attacked like the promotion side of it, like the self-promotion side of it. And like really better than I've seen a lot of guys who first get into it, I think, again, like not to just always harp on the track transition, but a lot of guys, they've never had to do any sort of self-promotion because that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
Like it's, I compete for this school, my numbers are this, I'm going here. Like that's how it goes. And you seem to take to it quicker, like understanding like, hey, I got to get sponsorships. I got to get people, I got to be a value add for these companies and stuff like that. So why do you think you took to that so quick? What made your eyes open to that quicker?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was the amount of travel that I realized that you have to do. Sponsors help. But I mean, to me, the biggest thing was growing the games. It wasn't about me so much. It was about pushing the games to a bigger audience.
Sure.
When I first came into it, I'd heard about it, but someone as deep into throwing as I was, I barely heard like that it was a thing. Yeah. Which to me just didn't make any sense. So when I was very anti, like when I got into it, I was very anti Instagram. I was very anti all of these different social medias, and I had a Facebook that I never checked, but that was it. But when I realized that, there was this big market for a sport that is pretty awesome that I felt like not enough people had heard about, I wanted to start promoting it. So when I created my Instagram specifically to start promoting me throwing the Highland Games. If that helped me, cool. But I wanted to promote like, hey, I'm going to this games. Come check it out, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You make a good point that like, it does help you, like, and you have, that's okay for that to be a pragmatic thing is like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. Mm-hmm. And a way to get more eyes and potential more good things is for more people to see the sport. But I'm on the same boat as I'm on the same train of thought as you, boat, train, whatever. I'm on a vehicle with you about it. But that I having been on the field so many years and with so many great athletes, I can't believe how great and how incredible some of the athletes that we compete with are, and that there's not a major stage for them. I've thrown in the same class with Spencer Tyler before he went pro, and people could see the difference. Like it's one of my favorites because it was like early in my career, we went to some just shithole games in like Dublin, Texas. I think it was terrible. And, but it was like it was Spencer, me, and then a few other guys throwing an open class. But like, when I say it was Spencer and me, it was like, it was like a mile between us and then maybe a quarter mile between me and the rest of the other guys. Like I took second that day. I always tell everybody I took second place to Spencer Tyler. That's my biggest accomplishment. But yeah, like seeing him in person and having known him for so many years and trained with him, I'm like, Jesus, man, how is that person, along with the people who can potentially beat him or are world champions already, how do we not have this on TV? Like, how is this not once in a while, like a spotlight? I'm with you, man. I want more people to see like, hey, these are just as good as the athletes you see in major sports.
Yeah. And when I like going back to that second games ever where I was at Loon, I got the opportunity to go kind of hang out with the pros that night. And, I'm sitting there with one of the guys and they're kind of pointing out the pros as they walked in, There's, that's Andy Vincent, he's former NFL player, strongman. There's his brother, he's a 2-time world champion, and just pointing out all these things. I'm like, how have I never heard of these people?
Seriously.
Like, and seeing Dan McKim on the field, and like, how have I never heard of these people? So that was kind of an eye opener to me. Just seeing these freak athletes, do these crazy things in the world of throwing, which is where I was very involved in, that I had never heard of, and it didn't make any sense to me. So that's where I really wanted to help change that.
Well, and one thing that I've been watching some of your, the stuff that you promote and the way you go about it. You've been in some commercials for a brewery. I know there's the Kilt Lifter, I think is the name of the brew. What's the name of the brewery? Remind me.
Four Peaks Brewery. They're out of Arizona.
And it's done like tongue in cheek and fun. And it's kind of showing off like, hey, this big, strong dude, and I think I've said for a long time now that we should embrace that instead of it being like, hey man, we're really serious. Like we're as good as track and field guys. Like it's a serious, like, let's, like put us on TV with all the graphics. No, it's spectacle and it's weird and it's fun, but let's embrace that. Let's go along with that. These are big, giant dudes doing crazy shit. Yeah. And like, that's how you get people in, man. Like people don't start watching any sport because they're like, man, this guy has like in football, they don't start watching because a receiver has the most receptions in the playoffs of all time. Like they don't watch because like, oh, this, like this guy's got a 15 game hit streak. It's amazing. They don't start watching because of that. They watch because of the freak athleticism part. They watch because like, oh my God, did you see that catch last week? I'm gonna start watching that team. And like, if you see one of us like throwing a keg over a bar or, like one of our bonus events or something, or like that thing was 56 pounds and he threw over the bar, that's what you want. So play into that. And so I think it feels like you get that. Like it feels like you get the, like, I don't need everybody to take me seriously all the time.
I mean, I get that. I'd love the sport to be taken seriously on like, at a higher level. But I see both sides, and I like to play to both sides. Yeah. I play to the spectacle, but then also I do take this as a serious sport. Yeah. Like the pandemic for me was terrible for me mentally, just because I had trained for the past year with Ryan, and I was feeling really good, and I opened up at Queen Mary, and everything was hitting on all cylinders, and everything gets shut down. So like, that kind of killed me mentally for like a year. And I understand, both sides of, it is just a spectacle, but I also like to push the fact that these are crazy athletes doing crazy things. And, the sport itself could be looked at a little more like a sport and not just a spectacle, but the spectacle is always there. It's kind of like what strongman is kind of evolved into. The spectacle is there.
Yes. Perfect example. Perfect.
The spectacle is there. But it's still, it's being started to look at as like a legitimate sport. But the spectacle is always going to be there.
And that's what brings eyes. The spectacle brings eyes. And that's the part that everybody misses. Like, I'm not going to get on a soapbox with you about the whole thing, but I'll just mention, like, I think there's a lot of people in our sport and many other fringe sports, they get too worried about the little stuff, the little battles about like, well, we got to standardize this, or there needs to be drug testing at these events and stuff like that. Can come in time. It can. Yeah. But like you're saying, you have to see both sides and realize like you need the spectacle brings the eyes. And then once you get them interested, be like, oh man, this is legit. Like there's like a stat sheet and like these, these guys have a competition circuit that they do. And like there's a league and like that stuff starts to matter. But at first you just need to get people to see your half Thor. You're like whoever that is, for us right now, I think Spencer's the closest you got, but we have so many athletes coming up. They're going to give him a run for his money now. And that's what happens, man. You got Colin, you got Garrett coming in now as a brand new pro that's pushing everybody. It would be a great time to highlight the spectacle, but also be like, hey man, check out how amazing these dudes actually are technically, not just like that they're a big brute. Like we've seen it, right? Like they're strong, they're big and strong, but you can get the strongest dude in the world out on the field. And he couldn't compete in a 9-event games with you guys. Yeah. Like Haffey can throw it, 20 plus feet easy, the weight of a bar. That's fine. But run a full games, I don't know how it's going to go. So it's a different level.
It's, the athleticism is totally different than like strongman. And I do, obviously strongmen, have come into the games and done really well. But I mean, on the overall, the grand scheme of things, you can look at them as, the spectacles are two totally different types of athleticism. And I think that can really, really draw people in, especially you start adding the history element of it. And, we're wearing kilts and, we're not throwing a standardized shot, we're throwing a rock and, things like that, I think, can continue to help draw people in.
It's fun. I mean, that's why we're doing it, right? That's why we're on a podcast talking about it right now, because it's fun and it's proven to be some sort of universal fun that we all get into. I mean, there's never going to be bigger fans of the Highland Games than the people that do it, to be perfectly honest. Like, we're never going to have bigger fans, but we could certainly get more. I mean, you could certainly have more people that are like drawn to this. Is like, if it's an option to watch, I'm sure it's all going to watch it because it's fun.
Yeah. I mean,
and that guy from the beer commercials in there.
Yeah. And I like to get it to a point where I don't have to explain what the Highland Games is.
Oh, yes.
Every time I tell somebody I do it. If I can help get the sport to that point, I'm happy. Where I can just say, you heard of the Highland Games? Like, oh yeah, I've heard of it. Like, okay, half the battle's done. Mission
accomplished. Yes, sir. Let's go. Well, dude, you've already done a fantastic job promoting the games. And I really enjoy what you're doing for the sport. I enjoy the fact that you take training seriously, but you've learned to take yourself not seriously on the field. So I thank you for coming on and talking about it. Let me do that. It's been incredibly fun. Where, if people want to find you, or if you got things you want to promote or brands you want to shout out, anything like that, this is the time, man. Where do people need to find you? What do they need to look at?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's flower_power_HG. You can find me on. I just started a TikTok too, under the same name.
Ooh, look at you, young fella.
Trying, that I don't. That's a medium I still don't understand. So
same, yeah.
And then some of my sponsors, kind of fit, kind of fat apparel. They've really helped me out, and they're going to continue helping me out this year. Four Peaks Brewery as well, that Kilt Lifter beer. It's a Scottish style ale. It's one of the best Scottish ales I've ever had, guaranteed. And Cerberus Strength USA as well. They've helped me out as well. So
yeah, man, they do a ton for the strength community. So that's an awesome one to have behind you. That's cool, man. All right. Well, again, man, I can't thank you enough. I hope we get to do this again. And I hope now that things get back to normal, I get to share the field with you. We can actually have a couple of laughs and critique each other's throwing.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I'll be back in Texas in July for the games that Spencer is putting on in New Braunfels.
Dude, that's it, man. I'll be there. I'm probably going to throw Masters there. So, because I'm an old guy now. So yeah, dude, I look forward to it, man. That'd be great. Hopefully you can sit down with a microphone, have some other guys there, have some laughs.
Absolutely. I'm down. Anytime you want to chat, I'm down, man.
All right, Kyle. Thanks a lot, brother.
Of course.
Heavy Light is brought to you by Throw Bros. Throw Bros is the only online store for Highland Games athletes. Gear up, get throwing. Use code HEAVYLIGHT, all one word. You're going to save 10% at throwbros.com.